Hello everybody, this is Mark. I'm a Principal Program Manager in Microsoft Azure, and I focus on Azure Data Factory and Synapse Analytics, pipelines, and data flows, which are features that provide ETL and data integration for you, and they are available on both products. And we are essentially a cloud scale data integration ETL service. And for this session, I'm going to talk to you about what's new in Azure Data Factory. I'll catch you up to speed in terms of where we've been investing in the past year, and then I'll also talk to you a little bit about where we're going with the products. And that'll be about the first half of this session. We'll be getting you up to speed on these things, and then in the second half, I'll jump into some demos, do some live things for you. We'll look at, actually, you know what, I have an agenda, so let's just go to that and we'll talk about it while I have the agenda slide up. The demos are going to cover data quality, change data capture, and script activity, some newer enhancements that we've made to the product and newer use cases that are possible within Data Factory and Synapse. And let's see, so I'll talk a little bit about the Microsoft Data Integration team, which is the team that I represent, the product group. And then, and I think the rest I've already covered, so I think we're ready to go. Let's jump right in. And thank you for joining and watching, by the way. I appreciate you being here. So the Microsoft Data Integration product portfolio covers essentially these products that you see on the screen today. It's a plethora of different products, and we cover many different cohorts and use cases, from what we call a citizen data integrator, someone who works closer to the business data. You'd probably be using Power Query in that case, to what we call a Pro DI, a Pro Data Integrator, which is someone who's going to use SQL Server integration services that's been with SQL Server for a long time, or Azure Data Factory, or born in the cloud at scale data integration ETL tool. And then we've brought those, goodies from ADF and put them into Azure Synapse Analytics. And when you have a Synapse Analytics workspace, you get all the power of ADF built right in. So all of these things are within the Microsoft Data Integration team that I'm on, and we work on all these things as a complete team to give you a full, rich set of capabilities around data integration and ETL with Microsoft. It's a very, a serious investment area for Microsoft, one that we take a lot of pride in what we do. That being said, Data Factory itself is a first-class Microsoft service, and so we make sure that we have Data Factory available to you in all the regions and all the data centers across the globe, no matter where your data sits, no matter where you launch your compute resources. We will be available for you there. So there's really essentially 4 pillars within Data Factory that we in the product team really focus on when we set our priorities and our investment strategies. And that's an ease of use. So you're going to see a lot of code-free capabilities around building workflows and data transformations, lifting and shifting or rehosting your SSIS. So the legacy SSIS packages that you have, and if you want to modernize that into the cloud, we make it super easy with integration runtime. It's called the SSIS integration runtime to do that. Built-in capabilities for Git and CI/CD, critically important for a successful enterprise of data engineers and data integrators to be able to collaborate and to be able to have a code repository for your ETL jobs, and that's built into Data Factory. Cost-effective in the sense that Data Factory is a platform service, and you pay as you go. You don't pay for essentially unused licenses or unused time. It's a utilization-based model and a consumption-based model. So as you use and you consume data in pipelines, that's how you are built. So you can have a lot of control over your costs and your spend. And it's also a fully managed and serverless service, so that you don't need to stand up a Spark cluster, although we run our data transformations for you using data flows in the cloud with a serverless Spark infrastructure. You don't need to worry anything about that. You don't need to keep a Spark cluster running. We essentially have an ephemeral model for that. Scaling on demand. And then in the powerful category, it's very important to note that the power of a data integration tool is going to be all the different things that you can connect to, both in the source and the sink or destination side. And so we provide you with the built-in enterprise data connectors. You don't need to buy or do anything extra to get any more. In fact, we're always iterating and always complementing the current set of connectors we have with more. We're over 100 connectors now, and we make those available to you and lay them up in the service instantaneously without you needing to do anything else or pay any extra for it. The orchestration and monitoring at scale is extremely important to note that managing and monitoring your ETL jobs can be very tricky and difficult when you have a large data engineering ecosystem, and we make that super easy visually within Data Factory. On the intelligence side, we do some really cool things around having the data movement service, which comes to you in terms of the copy data activity, making that work really super efficiently on our Azure Fabric by determining the best location for the compute. We do the same thing on the Spark side, on the serverless Spark side, where we are also working on the ability to be able to have the right size clusters for you. But another really important thing about the automation and the intelligence that we've built into Data Factory is we've invested a lot in change data capture and replication, such that it makes it super easy for you to only pull in the latest set of changed data instead of needing to requery the entire data set. Now let's level set a classic sort of reference architecture for Data Factory and Synapse Analytics pipelines. It's going to look something roughly equivalent to this, whereby you have a set of data that is essentially your source data. And that can be not just in Azure, but it could be in other clouds. We connect to other clouds, and we also connect very often with our customers to on-premises data. You can both read and write data to on-premises. And the audiences across the top, as I mentioned this earlier, is going to be from a data engineer, data scientist, data integrator, ETL, or citizen integrator. We make our data integration tools available to all the different set of audiences and personas. Now, another important sort of cross-cutting feature at the bottom is the orchestration monitor and the data lake. Data lake is essential to an effective set of data pipelines that you're going to run in the cloud, and orchestration and monitoring is just that bread and butter, need that you have to be able to quickly and easily go to market and production with your data pipelines, and then be able to watch them and monitor and rerun them over time. And that's all built into the service. So you're going to ingest the data with those pre-built connectors I mentioned earlier, and then you're going to do some work in processing that data, and many different ways that we provide for you to do that. From the pipeline, you add what are known as activities. Known as activities can do things like transform data in a no-code, low-code environment, which is called mapping data flows, built into Data Factory, single pane of glass within your browser, to be able to build very, very powerful, scaled-out transformations that run on Apache Spark without you needing to ever learn Spark. Or you can use the wrangling data aspect of that, which comes through Power Query, which is built into Data Factory. And if you are more of a code-centric or code-first user, we absolutely support activities that allow you to process and transform data using Databricks, Synapse Spark, Azure Functions, Azure ML, and so on. The serving layer in most of these cases is going to be something like your SQL pools in Azure, Synapse, and then at the end of the day, you're providing your data and the reports and the business decision-making capability through your BI tools. Now, just to kind of come back around again to the connectors. The connectors are across all kinds of different data stores, not just Microsoft. They're on-prem, Azure, other clouds. And we continue to grow this because there's always new things that we can connect to. There's so many different kind of data stores out there. It's just amazing how many there are. We have over 100 of them, nothing extra for those. Now this is really, it gets into the really cool low-code, fast time to production market aspect of Data Factory, where we give you a tool, a designer built into your browser, so it's zero footprint on your on-premises to be able to use this tool, Data Factory and Synapse Analytics. And you're going to build your code-free pipelines to orchestrate all the different things that you can do. So the example I have on the screen has some control flow things like if then else. You have looping in there. You have constructs that can provide the data movement, which is the copy data. The data transformation, data flow, and a notebook is orchestrated in this flow as well. Then you connect that into your Git repo so that you can collaborate on this. So the pipeline at the end of the day within your factory is your core primary unit of work. You can add into it the code-free data transformation, which is through mapping data flows. And this is where you would join data and you would transform data. You would create new columns. You would change columns, upsert data. So just all the different things you can think of with transformation built into this. We have hundreds of transformation functions. We have a whole toolbar. I'll show you this in the demos, by the way, if you haven't seen it before. A whole toolbar of rich transformation primitives as well. Use this for your data cleansing, your transformation, your aggregation, slowly changing dimensions, etc. Now, if you like to work more in sort of that Excel-based Power Query or data-first approach that we call it, that's available to you in Data Factory as well. And so you can transform the data at scale using Spark, just like Mapping Data Flows does. Using Power Query, you don't need to know anything about Spark. We will translate your Power Query into Spark for you. And then if it's your pipelines, if it's your data flows, your activities that are running notebooks, doesn't matter. We're going to provide you rich insights into how those are all performing through the monitoring tool built into Data Factory. Extremely important, and this is something that essentially just comes for free along with using the service. Now, I don't want to neglect the code-first approach to things. So there's all kinds of different services within Azure that you can use to transform your data. SQL, HD Insights, Azure Batch, so on and so forth. You're going to find activities in the pipeline that allow you to put your code in there and transform your data. Rehosting your SSIS or lifting and shifting into the cloud is extremely important and something that happens very often for our customers who have a large footprint of SSIS and want to modernize their ETL. But it's not just taking what you've done on-prem and making that into a cloud service. I mean, that's a big part of it, but also, as you see from this example, you can then just snap in your SSIS packages into other transformations. So it's very, very common to have a pipeline that does many of the things I've talked about. These are not either or binary decisions to be made. You can bring data in through copy activity and then transform it with the mapping data flow through a low-code interface, and then call out into a notebook in Synapse Spark using the exact same data, and then even add an SSIS call activity as well. So it's all available to you, and you can string all these things together into very complex workflows. An important point on the SSIS I don't want to neglect is the fact that all of the awesome sort of additional components you can get from our partners in the SSIS world are also available to you in ADF SSIS. So the whole ecosystem of partners is available as well. It's part of what you get with the SSIS lift and shift and rehosting. I want to talk about a couple of really key scenarios to think about in terms of how you would use Data Factory. The first one is data migration, both for a data lake. An example would be a petabyte scale big data workload that was migrated from AWS S3 and on-prem Hadoop to Azure from our customers. Another one is terabyte sized enterprise data warehouse migration from Oracle Exadata, Netezza, Teradata, and AWS Redshift to Azure. Now, because we have connectors to all of these, migration becomes a very easy, simple thing to do within Data Factory. And because you can adjust the amount of throughput and the parallelization and all the different knobs you have on the copy activity, it makes migration a very common workload that you'll find in Data Factory. Then there's more on the ETL side, where this is an example of migrations from legacy ETL tools. In this case, it was Informatic Power Center. And at the end of the day, when the migration happened from Power Center, everything transferred and migrated ended up in 12,000 production data flow pipelines that are executed weekly and 500 billion rows processed. And I think that the common patterns that you see at the bottom are what you're going to see in most of these migrations when you're moving from another ETL tool to ADF, slow change in dimensions, fact table loading, error row handling when you're loading data into your database. And there are some columns that have maybe some data type issues or some constraints that are hit. And maybe the casting isn't working. And so those things can be captured and can be trapped within Data Factory. And then here's an example of coming from something that's a little bit more modern, but also needed to be migrated, and that's going from Azure Data Lake Analytics and SQL into Data Factory. Because Data Factory has the mapping data flows, which is big data analytics ETL at scale, you get that same power that you had in ADLA and SQL. And in this case, the customer ended up with 26,000 production data flow pipelines executed weekly and 15 trillion rows processed. And a lot of the really advanced features in mapping data flows that ADF brings to the table that were used here were things like pattern matching. So you don't have to build a separate transformation rule for every transformation you're going to do. Instead, you can apply a pattern. In this case, it's saying if the type of incoming column is a string, then you want to transform it. Or if you look at the middle section, when you have a wide flow, you have hundreds of transformations that you can apply. And you can also apply metadata validation rules to your patterns as well. All right, let's break from that a little bit, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how to learn to do and use some of the things that I just talked about so far. There's a link here, an AKA-MS link, aka.ms/adf/Azure Learn for some free learning, and you can learn at your own pace. all the things I just talked about. So I encourage you to go there and start to learn about using Data Factory. Another great resource that we have is our YouTube channel, aka.ms/ADF videos. These are all free. We have over 100. And these are smaller, chunked, bite-sized videos. That's something you can watch if there's something particularly you want to learn and see one of us on the team actually doing it in the video and how it's done. It's very instructive in that case. That being said, let's talk a little bit about product roadmap, what we've been doing the past year and where we're going to go and look at going into the future. So one of the really, really important key aspects of a successful ETL data integration process within our customers we find is a combination of data governance and data integration. Data governance is just critically important to a successful data engineering process and to a successful really data landscape. And so we're building more and more integration directly with Microsoft Purview that provides those capabilities around searching for data sets, classification of data sets, data quality rules, and those kinds of things. And that whole area of data quality and data cleaning is really something you're going to find in Data Factory that's really going to pop going forward. So I'm going to do some demos on some of that for you in just a few minutes. The native CDC capabilities as well, to be able to only bring in the changed set of data, is something that we've invested in quite a bit very recently, and we're going to do more of that. Complex data transformation gives you the ability now to be able to build data transformations in a low-code environment that uses the Microsoft AI platform and cognitive services to do things like mask PII data automatically for you. And also to do things like be able to read data out of a PDF and a table in a PDF document. Very, very powerful. And then the last thing I'll call out on here is a requirement from a lot of our customers was to be able to reuse a lot of these patterns in their code that they have in Data Factory. And so we've enabled things like what are known as flowlets and user-defined functions to be able to reuse your patterns. And like I said earlier, this is all powered by Data Factory, Synapse Analytics, Power Query, and SSIS. And that's Microsoft Data Integration. All right, so where we're going, let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing the past year. So on the data movement side, data movement is the service that is surfaced to you through the copy activity in a pipeline. We have added the metadata-driven pipeline capability through the copy copy tool that went generally available. We've added SAP CDC. We've also added the ability to have the copy activity to support upserts in several connectors. And on the connector side, we've added STP S3, more parameterization. A very common, frequent ask of our customers is our customers just use Data Factory in just such enormously complex environments that it doesn't make sense to have to force you as a user to create new pipelines for every different permutation of a pattern. Instead, parameterize things and make it very flexible. And we totally buy into that and invest in that area. Connectors like TeamDesk and Smartsheet and QuickBase, Cosmos DB as an inline connector support now for data flows, and always encrypted SQL connections. On the data flow side, we've added the ability to have the cluster start up very, very fast now. We've added the assert transformation. I'll talk about that in a little bit for expectations and data quality. The parse transformation, parameterizing and link services, fuzzy joins, flowlets for usability, and I mentioned all those others already on here. Now, the export data preview to CSV at the bottom is a feature we've been adding to Data Factory in many different areas. You can export your data preview to CSV from the data preview pane inside of Data Factory data flows now. You can also export your monitoring view into a CSV. Let's see, what else would I like to call out on here? I think the monitoring areas as well, I'll just kind of finish on that one. But well, let's say both monitoring and CI/CD. Very, very critical, important areas in Data Factory that we're going to continue to invest in. We feel like making these easier for you is really going to make your job and your life a lot better. And you see we've added things like the ability to have more flexible filters, improve the speed of the navigation, rerunning pipelines with new parameters. And then on the CI/CD side, being able to connect up to DevOps in a different tenant, and as well as adding script line support for data flow so it's easier to find diffs in your code. Now, how does that, how do you kind of sort of turn that around and look instead at forward-looking what we're going to do in the next year? Okay, so these are investment areas that you're going to see us put some effort into. We're going to continue to have more of the goodness of ADF and Power Query come into Synapse. The data mapper, which is in Synapse, is something that we'd like to bring into to a data factory to make it really super easy to build your transformation pipelines. We're gonna, like I said earlier, we're gonna continue to grow the Purview footprint within Data Factory, and then we're also going to put a lot of focus continuing in connectors, more native connectors for data flow, more change data capture connectors. I'm going to demo some of the change data capture capabilities we have today in just a little bit. Yeah, and then of course we're also going to continue to grow our abilities and our capabilities in CI/CD, scheduling and control flow. Some really exciting things you're going to see land. And there we're going to do some things that I think really make it a lot easier to be able to have flexible pipelines that can have more activities in it, and that can allow you to do things like have error handling and or options in the workflows. You'll see some things coming in that area. Some really exciting areas that we're going to focus on there. So the native support for change data capture that we have today that I'm going to talk about in the demos makes it super easy for you to be able to automatically detect deltas on your sources. We have things like support for the change feed from Cosmos DB, looking for the changed rows in the SQL database. You can also look for changed files and updated files in Blob Store. And it's just a matter of just checking a box on your source transformation. You don't really need to change your logic. You just switch on change data capture, and it's that easy. It's a single click capability to go from reading all your data to just reading the change data. And we also support net replication. So within Synapse, you'll see what's known as Synapse Link, and that gives you that sort of no ETL capability to bring in changed data as well and do data replication with that. And that's using the ADF engine without needing to build an ETL pipeline to do it. And that pretty much sums it up. So I think right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to demo mode, and we'll go over these 3 demos of data quality, CDC, and the script. I'll throw in the script activity in there as well as part of the as part of this. And I think I'll just finish up the slides real quick. And I wanted to say that thank you everybody for joining and for watching this session. Let's go over into the demo, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so here we are now in demo mode. Enough of the presentations. Move that out of the way a little bit. So what I have is a data flow on my screen. Now this data flow is going to show a little bit about building data quality and data cleansing routines inside of Data Factory using the mapping data flows capability. This would also work just as fine the same way in Synapse Analytics. So what I have is a single source from Azure SQL database from some AdventureWorks data with some addresses in it. What I've done is to set up some data quality rules. The first rule is called a metadata checker, and it's using a conditional split transformation. The toolbox with all the different transformation primitives I mentioned earlier are all here on the plus sign. You can see all the different things that you can add. And then inside of here is the expression language that comes with Data Factory for mapping data flows with several hundred transformation functions in it. So what this pass-fail metadata checker is doing is using this expression that is making sure that these sets of columns are available in the incoming metadata. If they are, then we're going to continue with the flow. If they're not, then we're going to go down to this bottom stream here, which is the fail stream, and I'm going to use this known as an assert transformation. The assert transformation will allow me to set data quality rules and to even, in this case, and what I'm doing in this case is I'm using the fail data flow. So it allows me to say that if I'm down this fail path, I'm going to say, I'm going to give this a identifier, and the assert ID is going to be called failed metadata, and then I'm going to have a description. And my description is simply a string that says not all columns present. You can also include values from columns and rows, and you can use full expressions available to you there. So if the metadata does not match, and does not have these required columns, the entire data flow just fails right away. It's a fail fast mechanism. Down my pass stream, I have an assert called data quality rules. And in there, I am setting two rules, an expect true, an expectation for true, and expectation for unique. For true, I'm saying that the country region field has to be United States. So this is a US only rule is what this is. So I called it assert US only. And if it fails, if the assert fails and the expectation is not met, then it's going to give this string, which is saying the country region is not valid. So it's going to replace country region with the country region value for each row that it finds that this assert fails. For expect unique, I'm using the assert ID of address ID unique, and the expression for my string is going to be ID of that current address ID is not unique. So I'm saying every address ID on here has to be unique. So all I do is I just say the expression is just simply that column, and ADF will do the work for you. We'll decide and we'll find if in your data set the address ID value is unique across all the rows. And on the data preview, you can see what happens. And so any row that does not pass that assertion and the expectation is not met, you will get the marker here saying that this failed. Now from there, you can do data cleansing. In this case, I'm doing a filter. So I'm taking out countries that have null in it with a very simple rule saying is not null. Sorry. Yes, not is null, is not null. Filtering out countries with null. And then I'm making a full address. So I'm cleaning up the address field by making my own full address from the existing columns in the incoming data. At the end, I'm outputting this into the lake, and I can get all of the only quality rows and columns as I have defined it. Now, in addition to that, there's an errors tab in Dataflow where I can say any of those errors that failed assertion, put that to a separate file. Output to sync means go ahead and send the row there. You can deselect this and say don't send the row to the sync at all, just completely bypass it. In this case, I would put my errored rows into a file in my Azure Blob Store, and I can define the container, and you can browse for it here, and I can make a directory. Now, the errored rows will go into a file now, into that folder path. All you have to do next is go into a pipeline. And in the pipeline, you would add a data flow. So you'll find the data flow activity here under move and transform. You can add a data flow, but in this case, I already have it. And I just point to that data flow. And now when you run this, the data will be processed and the error rows will go to that error row file. So that's a way to build a data quality rule or set of rules within a data factory. Okay, now let's take that one step further. This is where I want to talk to you about that script activity that I mentioned earlier. So let's say now that we wanted to run this data quality data flow from the pipeline, but we also wanted to do something like, let's say, log the errors into a logging database table somewhere. Well, there's a script activity now. This is one of the new features that we've landed in Data Factory and in Synapse pipelines. So I can add a script activity onto here, and I can attach that to my data flow. So when the data flow is done, the script activity can run. And you can do something like connect this into your SQL database and run a SQL script. You can run both a SQL query, so DML, as well as DDL with a non-query. So if you click on non-query, I could use a command like a alter table. If I use the query, I can do something like what I'm going to do now, which is I'm going to use that to log that this is run. So it can be errors, it could be just runs. In this case, let's log that this has run. Okay, so I'm going to grab my insert statement from my database. And essentially my data quality rules, my assertions are really looking for a schema drift, if you think about it that way, because I'm saying that the schema has to meet this definition. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert into my error log these set of values. So every time I run this, and I'll tell you what we'll do. Why don't we just go ahead and we can just go ahead and run this. Now, when you want to run and test your pipeline, just click on the debug button up here. You don't need to publish. See, I'm connected into my, you can see up here, I'm connected into my GitHub for my Git, my CI/CD. What this will do, this is going to run and process those AdventureWorks address rows, and it's going to perform the data quality checks and data cleaning and then output that into the lake. So we'll show all that and then it's going to log the errored rows, the assertions that failed. Then when it's done, it's going to log into my table that this run was completed. Okay, so we're in progress now. And if you click on the eyeglasses, this is where you get that monitoring view, the monitoring richness from Data Factory. And you can see that it has already written 450 rows. And you can get details of each of the processing steps along the way within your data flow. And this will happen for any of the pipeline activities. You can get really detailed analysis of your copy activities, for that matter, as well. Let's actually go back to the designer and the editor. And let's take a look at some of this progress. So I'm writing a file. Let's go back into the data flow. The output is going into this folder called folder out. So if I go to open that, I can see that it's my output demo out1 folder in my container in my blob store. Okay, let me go over into my blob store explorer, into my container. We put everything into a folder called demo. It was output, and then demo out1. Demo out1. There we go. Okay, so here we can see the output from the successful rows that came through the data flow. That's the output. Now let's go and look at the error log from the assertions. Okay, and here's one of the files, and you can see that we got the error saying that this assertion failed because it's not in the US, it's Canada. It says Canada is not valid. Remember, we replaced the country with the name of the country, the value for the country column in that row. And so the outputs, the invalid row was output to this file. Now you could take this file and these files from this folder and you could reprocess them then. If you had some other rules that might maybe modify now one of those values, or if you just want to keep a log of the errored rows, that's perfectly fine too. The last thing we did with that was to have the pipeline write the log using the script activity. So there's the data flow that completed. Let's go ahead and look at the monitor on that one more time. Yep, we got 450 rows, 6 milliseconds and 2 milliseconds. Okay, great. Now if we go back to the designer, the script activity completed. So let's go into the database. And if we look at the set of runs, we'll see that right here is the run that I just had, and it inserted my row through there. So that's the script activity and assertions, setting expectations for data quality rules in Data Factory. All right, we have time for one more demo, and this demo is going to be the demo of CDC. So I should have time to show you two different CDC demos. I'm going to start with files. So we'll start with a storage account. All right, so for this one, we're going to have a source of a data set that's called CDC Movies. Let's open up that data set. That goes to my data lake store, Gen 2, my container CDC. Let's look at .csv. So this is a movies data. And there you go. You'll see what that looks like. Here under source options, all you have to do is just turn on change data capture. And I also want to read all the files in initial load. What that's going to say is it's going to say read the entire set of files that you find in that folder. But after that, only give me the changed data, only the files that were updated or added after that. And then the sync is just going to write those results out to a file, and I am just writing this to folder out CDC. Let's open up that data set. That's going to go to output CDC. All right, pretty straightforward. It's also my data lake store. So all you have to do, you just go onto your source, and actually let's close this one now. We don't need this one anymore. I'll go ahead and save that. And let's see, so we don't need this pipeline anymore either. Oh, we'll save that one too. that is being called from here, I believe. Let's see. Demo of CD. No, we'll call it this one. So I'm going to take this pipeline. I'm going to call this data flow demo of CDC files. Just type it in here. There we go. Now notice that when I have CDC enabled on my data flow, this checkpoint key shows up here. So you can override this to reset your checkpoint key. This essentially resets the checkpoint. ADF, when you've turned on these flags to utilize change data from the source, ADF will maintain the checkpoint for you, but you can override that. I think that's probably good enough. Let's go ahead and let's just run this. So I got to go back to the pipeline. I just realized actually, okay, yeah, this is fine. This will work. Okay, CDC demo was doing some other things, so we'll close that one out. Okay, so we're going to use CDC storage. All right, let's go ahead and hit debug. We can just run this in real time live here and see how this works out. Now in the first run, I said read all initial files. So this should read that entire file and then put it out into my storage. Okay, so 34 seconds have passed. The data flow is done. If we look at the monitoring on that activity, we'll see that we processed 9,000 rows. It's the 9,127 rows to be exact. That is the full set of data in that file. Now, if we run this data flow again without making any changes, the Data Factory will automatically maintain that checkpoint, meaning it's going to look for any new files or data in that folder. And it should find none because nothing has been added, and we should process 0 rows. All right, and 19 seconds later, and if we look at the monitoring, 0 rows are written. Now, what happens if we come back around and inside of that folder that is our source, if we were to upload a file here. So I'm going to upload this file called newmovie.csv. And if we look at that file, there is one row called My Fake Movie. All right, let's go ahead. That's good enough. Let's go ahead and go back to the data flow into the pipeline. Now from the pipeline, we just hit debug again. Again, no changes. This is all maintained by Data Factory. All right. And what we should see now is one row that's processed. So let's give this a couple of seconds and see what happens. All right, if I look at the monitoring, you'll see one row. So that is how easy it is to implement CDC. And I'll show you the other aspect to it too, since we have some extra time. On the pipeline, I was mentioning that we have the checkpoint setting on here. I can override this with my own checkpoint value. And now, what do you think is going to happen if I run this again, now that you've kind of mucked with the system checkpoint? Right, essentially that is the mechanism the ADF is using to maintain the marker for the files and the data and the source. And so you see what happened was this time, because I completely reset the checkpoint, we processed 9,128 rows. So all the rows in the original file plus that one file that I uploaded, that one row, were then processed. All right, one more demo. Let's show CDC from SQL. Let me save all my changes. I like my changes. I'm going to keep them. We don't need these anymore. We can clean up a little bit here on our workspace. Let's go over to SQL CDC. Okay, again, a super simple data flow just to illustrate how this works. So I have a source that is a SQL database, and it's this data set here, the SQL products, AdventureWorks database, DIM products, database table. All I do in the source is I don't change any of my logic. I just go over to the source options and I click Enable Incremental Extract. Now we're working on more native CDC capabilities within these SQL connectors. For now, this is going to use the incremental date column. So you identify the column that has a timestamp. But we will maintain, the data factory will maintain again the timestamp, the checkpoint for you. So if you go over to settings on the data flow activity in this pipeline, you will again see the checkpoint being stored there for you. But you need to provide that date column, and data factory will find all the date time columns in your source and present them here for you. So it makes it very simple. And again, you can start reading from beginning. And then we'll write all these rows into an output folder in the lake. All right, so let's take a look at what that looks like. So we have over here in the database table, we have a total of dim products, 301 rows. Okay, so let's go back to the data flow and into the pipeline. Let's go ahead and run this and let's see what we get. We can again use the monitoring view to get the deep introspection and insights into each of the activities. And that'll tell us whether or not CDC is working. Okay, so that completed in 18 seconds. We'll look at the details with the eyeglasses, and 301 rows were written. Okay, great. Now, if we would run this again to remember what would happen. We made no changes to the source database table. We have CDC enabled, so only give me the incrementals. We read all the initial rows on the first run, and the checkpoint hasn't changed. So if we hit debug again, don't change anything, we should see 0 rows because nothing has changed. Let's see what happens. It's still queued, so give it a second. Zero rows. All right, so let's go ahead and let's see if we can force an update. We'll do an update on row product ID 737. We'll change the last updated, which is the incremental column we're using. We'll change it to the current timestamp. Okay, let's go ahead and run this guy again. And there you go, 1 row was written. So that's how simple and easy it is to enable change data capture within your SQL and storage account sources within Data Factory. All right, so that's it for my demos, and thanks for watching. I'm going to go back to the slides again, although I did do the whole sort of outro already, because there is a slide here at the end. I'll put it into full screen mode. And as I'm doing that, I'll say again, thank you so much for watching the show. And yeah, thanks again. See you next time.